He called me replaceable. Standing in the house I paid for, with his mistress on speakerphone, my husband looked me dead in the eyes and said I was nothing. Just an old expense he was ready to throw away. That was his first mistake. His second? Forgetting that I built everything he had. 3 months later, he was living in a tiny apartment, drowning in legal bills, while I walked away with $240 million. But before I tell you how a cheating husband lost everything in the most brutal way possible, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone with everything you had, only to watch them destroy you with a smile on their face? If you have, this story is for you. If you haven't, watch anyway. Because what I'm about to tell you could save you from the biggest mistake of your life. Hit that subscribe button right now, because you won't believe what happens next. And trust me, you don't want to miss the moment he realized he'd lost everything. Now let me take you back to where this all started. Back to when I still believed in forever. Welcome to Reality Stories Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. You know, they say you never really know someone until you see who they become when they think they've already won. I learned that truth standing in my own living room, listening to the man I loved laugh at me like I was a joke. But before I tell you how everything changed, let me take you back to where it all started. My name isn't important for this story. What matters is that I'm a 38-year-old woman who grew up with nothing. And I mean nothing. I grew up in the poorest part of Seattle, watching my mother work 2 jobs just to keep food on our table. I promised myself that one day, things would be different. So I worked. I worked harder than anyone I knew. I put myself through college doing 3 jobs at once. I cleaned offices at night, I waited tables on weekends, and I tutored kids after my own classes. I barely slept. But I graduated at the top of my class with a degree in real estate development. I was 26 years old when I finally felt like my life was starting. That's when I met Daniel. He walked into the real estate office where I was working as a junior developer. He had these big dreams about building affordable housing communities that would change how people lived. He wanted to create neighborhoods where working families could actually afford to buy homes. Beautiful homes. Not cheap boxes, but real places where kids could grow up safe and happy. I remember sitting across from him in that little conference room, listening to him talk about his vision. He had passion. He had heart. But he had no money and no clue how to make it happen. I saw something in him. Maybe I saw myself. Someone who wanted to lift people up. Someone who understood what it meant to struggle. So I helped him. I showed him how to write business plans. I introduced him to investors I'd met through my job. I worked with him every evening after my regular work ended, helping him turn his dream into something real. And somewhere between all those late nights and all those plans, we fell in love. 2 years later, when his first project was about to break ground, he asked me to marry him. I said yes without thinking twice. By then, I'd already invested everything I had into his company. $50,000. Every single penny I'd saved since I was 16 years old. Every sacrifice I'd ever made was sitting in that business. My mother cried when I told her. She said I was making a mistake, that men like him would take everything and leave me with nothing. My friends said the same thing. But I didn't listen. I believed in him. More than that, I believed in us. After we got married, I left my job to become his partner in the business. Not just his wife cheering from the sidelines, but his actual business partner. I became the chief operating officer. I managed every single project. I dealt with contractors, handled budgets, negotiated with city officials, and made sure every building was finished on time and under budget. Daniel was the face of the company. He was the one who talked to the press and shook hands at events. But I was the one who made everything work behind the scenes. For 10 years, we built something incredible together. Our company grew from one small housing project to developments all across Washington state. We built communities in Tacoma, Spokane, and Everett. We created homes for thousands of families. Families just like the one I grew up in. We bought a beautiful house in Bellevue overlooking Lake Washington. We had luxury cars. We took vacations to Hawaii and Europe. From the outside, we looked perfect. The American dream come true. But somewhere along the way, Daniel changed. Or maybe he didn't change. Maybe I just finally saw who he really was. It started small. He'd come home later and later from work. He'd say he was meeting with investors or visiting project sites. Then he started taking trips without me. Business trips to California, he'd say. Important meetings in Portland. His phone was always face down on the table. He changed all his passwords on our shared accounts. I noticed everything. But I told myself I was being paranoid. Successful men are busy, right? He's just working hard. He's stressed. I made every excuse in the book because the truth was too painful to even think about. Our conversations became shorter, colder. When I'd try to talk to him about the business, he'd brush me off or check his phone. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give me one-word answers. It felt like I was living with a stranger. Then our friends started giving me those looks. You know the ones I'm talking about. Those sad, pitying looks that say they know something you don't. One of my oldest friends pulled me aside at a charity event and asked if everything was okay at home. I smiled and lied through my teeth. I said everything was perfect. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Daniel, and I realized I didn't know this man anymore. I didn't know where he'd been or who he'd become. And that terrified me. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. I gave him a picture of Daniel and told him to follow my husband. 3 weeks later, the investigator handed me a folder that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. Inside were photos, timestamps, hotel receipts, text messages. Her name was Jessica. She was 26 years old with red hair and a bright smile. She worked as a project manager at our company. She'd been there for 9 months. The affair had been going on for 7. I sat in my car in the parking lot of that investigator's office for 2 hours, just staring at those photos. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold them. There was Daniel, my husband, holding her hand across a restaurant table, kissing her outside a hotel, getting into her car. The investigator had done his job well. Every photo was clear. Every receipt was detailed. There was no room for doubt or excuses. What hurt the most wasn't just that he was cheating. It was where he was taking her. Our favorite restaurant where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary. The hotel in San Juan Islands where we'd spent our honeymoon. He was rewriting our entire history with someone else. Taking our memories and giving them to her. I drove home that day and I didn't cry. I couldn't. I felt numb. Empty. Like someone had reached inside my chest and pulled out everything that made me human. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I started watching. Waiting. Gathering information. The businesswoman in me, the part that had survived poverty and fought for everything I had, that part told me to be smart. To be patient. That's when I started really looking at our company finances. I was the COO, so I had access to everything. But I'd been trusting Daniel to handle certain accounts. That was my mistake. What I found made my blood run cold. There were bank accounts I didn't know about. Money being moved in ways that made no sense. Transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He was hiding assets. Preparing for something. And the numbers told me a clear story. Daniel was planning a future that didn't include me. I made copies of everything. Every bank statement. Every transfer record. Every suspicious transaction. I kept them in a safe deposit box at a bank across town. Somewhere he'd never think to look. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Wednesday evening in October. I was in the kitchen pretending to care about the dinner I was making when I heard Daniel's car pull into the driveway. I walked to the entryway to meet him, and that's when I heard it. Her voice. Jessica's voice. Coming from his phone. He had it on speaker and didn't realize it. Or maybe he just didn't care anymore. She was laughing. That high, tinkling laugh that made my stomach turn. And she said, "I can't believe you have to go home to her tonight. She's so old and boring. I mean, she's like, what, 40? Practically ancient." Daniel laughed. My husband actually laughed and said, "She's 38, but yeah, it's not exactly fun. But don't worry, baby. She's basically just a signature on paperwork at this point. Once I figure out how to handle the legal stuff, we're done." I stood there frozen. In the house I'd helped buy. In the entryway I'd chosen the tile for. Listening to my husband reduced me to nothing. Jessica kept talking. What does she even do all day? I mean, you're the CEO. You're the genius who built this company. She's just riding on what you created. And Daniel, my husband of 10 years, the man I'd given everything to, said words I'll never forget. Exactly. She's nobody. She's replaceable. Replaceable. That word hit me like a punch to the chest. I stepped into the entryway where he could see me. The look on his face when he realized I'd been standing there, listening to everything. But it wasn't shame I saw in his eyes. It wasn't guilt or panic. It was annoyance. Like I'd interrupted something important. He ended the call quickly. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. My voice came out steady. Calm. I know everything, Daniel. The affair. The hidden bank accounts. All of it. I expected him to panic, to deny it, to apologize. Instead, he loosened his tie and shrugged like I'd just commented on the weather. So what? He said. What are you going to do about it? The coldness in his voice was like nothing I'd ever heard before. This wasn't the man who'd promised to love me forever. Or maybe it was, and I'd been too blind to see who he really was all along. I want a divorce, I said. He laughed, threw his head back and laughed like I'd told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Then he stepped closer to me. His face changed. Got hard. Mean. And he started talking. You think I'm scared of you leaving? Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? This house. Mine. The company. Mine. Everything you love about your life. All mine. You're nothing without me. He kept going. Listed all the reasons I should be grateful he married me in the first place. How he gave me a life I could never have achieved on my own. How he pulled me up from the gutter where I came from. He threw my childhood in my face like it was something to be ashamed of. He said I was getting old, gaining weight, becoming invisible. He said I should be happy with whatever scraps he decided to give me because no one else would ever want me anyway. Then he brought up the prenup. Remember that prenup you signed, sweetheart? That protects me. You walk away with whatever I decide to give you. And based on how ungrateful you've been acting, that's not going to be much. He was so smug, so confident. He really thought he had all the power. I looked him right in the eyes and said, You should have read that prenup more carefully. His smile faltered. Just for a second. But he recovered fast. Whatever. Try it. My lawyers will destroy you. Then he walked past me, went upstairs, threw some clothes in a bag, and left. Probably to spend the night with her. I stood in that entryway for a long time after Daniel left. Not because I was heartbroken. I was. But more than that, I was angry. And I was planning. Here's what Daniel didn't know about that prenup he was so confident about. I wrote it. 10 years ago, when we had nothing but dreams and debt, I drafted that prenup myself. I wrote it to protect both of us fairly. I made sure it was clear and legal and ironclad. Daniel never read it carefully. He just signed it, trusting me to handle the legal stuff like I handled everything else in our lives. And in that prenup, there were clauses. Beautiful, powerful clauses about what happens when someone cheats. About what happens when someone hides money. About how we defined what belonged to the company and what belonged to us personally. But more importantly, that prenup recognized me as a co-founder of the company. Not an employee. Not just a supportive wife. A co-founder. See, when we started that business, Daniel needed my money to get it off the ground. He needed my expertise. He needed my connections. So we structured the company with both our names on the founding documents. I owned 40% from the start. But over the years, as I brought in major projects and managed everything that made us successful, I'd negotiated for more equity. Every big deal I closed, I made sure the board recognized my contribution. Legal documents don't lie. And I had every single one of them organized and safe. I spent the next week gathering evidence. As COO, I had access to every account, every contract, every email in the company. I documented everything. The offshore accounts. The money he'd been hiding. The expense reports that showed the affair. Company credit cards used for hotels and gifts for Jessica. Jewelry. Trips. All paid for with company money. I also pulled up every major project I'd personally managed. Emails showing my work. Contracts I'd negotiated. Development deals I'd structured. I had proof of every single contribution I'd made to the company's success over 10 years. Then I called my lawyer. Her name is Patricia, and she's a shark in the courtroom. She specializes in high-asset divorces. When I walked into her office and laid out everything I had, she actually smiled. He has no idea what's about to hit him, does he? She said. I told her Daniel thought the prenup protected him. She laughed and said, Well, he's about to learn a very expensive lesson. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to our board members. The ones who'd worked with me for years. I had coffee with investors who knew I was the operational genius behind Daniel's vision. I didn't tell them about the divorce yet. I just reminded them of my contributions. My track record. My value. I planted seeds. I also discovered something that made my blood boil. Jessica was pregnant. Daniel had promised to marry her. He'd even shown her house designs for a bigger, better mansion. He was planning to replace me completely, like trading in an old car for a newer model. He'd been telling Jessica that I was worthless, that the divorce would be quick and simple, that they'd be living in luxury within months. He'd promised her everything that he'd once promised me. On a Monday morning, 3 weeks after that terrible night in the entryway, I filed for divorce. The papers were served to Daniel at the office, right before a board meeting. I made sure it was public and professional and absolutely humiliating. The filing outlined everything. My claims as co-founder, my equity stake, the infidelity clause in the prenup, the hidden assets, a detailed accounting of every contribution I'd made to the company's success, every project I'd managed, every dollar I'd saved us, every deal I'd closed. Daniel called me within an hour. He was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "You can't do this. You're going to destroy everything we built." I let him yell until he ran out of breath. Then I said very calmly, "No, Daniel. I'm going to take what I built. There's a difference." He threatened me with lawyers, with audits, with destroying my reputation. I reminded him that I had better lawyers, and that every audit would just expose more of his shady financial moves. "You want to go to war?" I said. "Fine. But remember who taught you how to fight." The next few weeks were chaos. The company board called an emergency meeting to review the situation. They went through every document I'd provided. They saw the founding papers with my name on them. They reviewed the projects I'd managed that had made the company millions. They looked at the emails proving I'd brought in our 3 biggest contracts. They examined the financial irregularities, the hidden accounts, the suspicious transfers. Then something beautiful happened. Someone, and I'm not saying who, sent an anonymous tip to the IRS about those offshore accounts and questionable tax reporting. Suddenly, Daniel wasn't just fighting a divorce. He was fighting federal investigators. His legal bills started piling up, mounting higher and higher. The company's reputation took a hit. News spread in our industry. Investors started asking questions. Projects got delayed because clients weren't sure if the company would survive. And slowly, one by one, the investors started switching sides. They'd always known I was the operational genius. Daniel was the face and the vision, but I was the one who made the vision actually work. I was the one who made it profitable. When it came time to choose, they chose the person who actually knew how to run a company. Jessica found out that Daniel was about to be broke. All his promises of mansions and luxury disappeared when she realized the money was tied up in legal battles. That most of the assets were actually mine. She left him, moved to California, and married some tech guy 3 months later. Daniel tried to call me one night about 2 months into the divorce proceedings. It was late, almost midnight. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. He was crying. I'd never heard Daniel cry before. Not once in our entire relationship. Not at his father's funeral. Not at our wedding. Never. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "Please stop this. We can work it out. We can go to counseling. We can start over. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I sat there in the dark in my bedroom, listening to him fall apart, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No anger. Just emptiness. "You should have thought about that," I said quietly, "before you called me replaceable." He kept talking, begging, making promises, saying he'd do anything, that Jessica meant nothing, that I was the only one who mattered, that he'd been stupid and blind and he'd throw himself at my feet if I'd just give him another chance. "Daniel," I interrupted him, "do you remember what you said to me that night? You said I was nothing without you. You said I was replaceable. You threw my childhood in my face. You mocked everything about me. You made me feel small and worthless and invisible." "I didn't mean it," he sobbed. "I was angry. I was confused. I was being an idiot." "No," I said. "You meant every word. You meant it because that's what you really think. That's who you really are. And I'm done pretending otherwise." I hung up, blocked his number, and I never spoke to him again outside of lawyers and courtrooms. The final settlement took 6 months to finalize. 6 months of lawyers and depositions and court appearances. 6 months of Daniel trying every trick in the book to discredit me or minimize my contributions. But the evidence didn't lie. The court recognized me as co-founder based on the original documents and my 10 years of contributions. The prenup held up perfectly, especially the clauses about infidelity and hidden assets. Every single thing I'd built into that document came back to protect me. In the end, here's what I walked away with. 60% of the company. The court valued it at $180 million. I got the house in Bellevue and the vacation property we'd bought in the San Juan Islands. I got my original $50,000 investment back with interest. 20% annual interest, compounded over 10 years. When you added everything up, I walked away with $240 million in assets. Daniel kept 40% of the company, but he lost his CEO position. The board didn't trust him anymore. Not after the hidden accounts. Not after the affair. Not after everything came to light. He was drowning in legal fees from the IRS investigation. He had to sell most of his remaining shares just to pay his lawyers. The government hit him with back taxes and penalties that wiped out almost everything he had left. Last I heard, he's living in a small apartment in Tacoma, working as a consultant for someone else's development company, making a fraction of what he used to make, driving a 10-year-old car. Jessica? She's married to that tech guy now. They live in San Francisco. She had her baby. Daniel sees those photos on social media sometimes. Pictures of the life he could have had if he'd just been faithful. If he'd just valued what he had instead of chasing something shiny and new. As for me, I'm running my portion of the company, and it's thriving. Better than it ever was with Daniel in charge. I've expanded into Oregon and Idaho. We're building affordable housing communities that actually work. Places where families can put down roots and build lives. I've started a mentorship program for young women in real estate and construction. I teach them about protecting themselves legally, about knowing their worth, about getting everything in writing, about never, ever relying on someone else to define their value. I bought my mother a beautiful house in Arizona where it's warm and she can finally rest after a lifetime of working herself to the bone. She cried when I gave her the keys. She said she was sorry for doubting me all those years ago. I travel now. I've been to places I only dreamed about when I was a kid. Italy, Japan, New Zealand. I go where I want when I want. I answer to no one. I sleep peacefully at night. No more lying awake wondering where my husband is or who he's with. No more making excuses. No more pretending everything is fine when it's falling apart. The money is nice. I won't lie about that. $240 million provides a very comfortable life. But you know what's better than the money? The freedom. The peace. The knowledge that I never have to settle for being called nothing ever again. I don't even feel angry anymore when I think about Daniel. He taught me valuable lessons. About knowing your worth. About protecting yourself. About the importance of legal documents and having your name on papers that matter. I learned that love is beautiful, but contracts are forever. I learned that your name on founding documents matters. I learned that the person who underestimates you will always be shocked when you win. I want to tell you something important before I finish this story. Something I wish someone had told me when I was younger. Your worth is not determined by who loves you or who stays with you or who chooses you. Your worth is determined by you. By what you build. By what you contribute. By what you stand for when everything falls apart. Daniel thought I was weak because I loved him. He thought my kindness was stupidity. He thought my trust was naivety. He looked at me and saw someone he could use and discard when he was done. He forgot that I was the same woman who'd clawed her way out of poverty. The same woman who'd put herself through school working 3 jobs. The same woman who'd taken a risk on him when he had nothing but dreams and empty pockets. He mistook my love for weakness. And that mistake cost him everything. I think about young women sometimes. Women who are where I was 10 years ago. In love with someone who has big dreams. Investing their time and money and energy into someone else's vision. Believing that love and loyalty will be enough. And I want to shake them and tell them, get your name on the papers. Protect yourself legally. Keep records of everything you contribute. Don't ever let anyone erase your role in building something just because they're the face of it. Love is beautiful. Partnership is beautiful. But protect yourself. Always protect yourself. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. Sometimes the person you love the most will hurt you the worst. Sometimes the person you build up will be the one who tries to tear you down. Sometimes your biggest enemy is sleeping in your bed. I'm not saying don't trust people. I'm not saying don't fall in love or take risks or invest in relationships. I'm saying be smart about it. Get everything in writing. Know your worth. Never put yourself in a position where someone else controls your entire future. Daniel thought that prenup protected him. He thought having his name as CEO meant the company was his. He thought I'd be too scared or too broken to fight back. He underestimated me. And that was his biggest mistake. You know what's funny? People sometimes ask me if I regret the 10 years I spent with Daniel. If I feel like I wasted a decade of my life on someone who didn't deserve me. And the answer is no. I don't regret those years because they taught me who I am. They showed me what I'm capable of. They prove that I can build something incredible from nothing. That I can survive betrayal and come out stronger. That I can fight and win when everything is stacked against me. Daniel didn't make me successful. I made me successful. He just gave me an opportunity to prove it. I run a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars now. I employ hundreds of people. I create homes for thousands of families. I mentor young women and teach them to value themselves. I take care of my mother. I live exactly the life I want to live. And I did all of that not because of Daniel, but in spite of him. That's the part one want you to understand. Your success doesn't come from who loves you or who believes in you or who gives you opportunities. Your success comes from you, from your work, from your brain, from your refusal to accept less than you deserve. I think about that night sometimes. Standing in my entryway, listening to Daniel and Jessica laugh at me. Listening to him call me replaceable, old, worthless, nothing. And I think about how wrong he was. I wasn't nothing. I was everything. I was the foundation he built his dreams on. I was the brain behind every success he claimed. I was the person who turned his visions into reality. He just couldn't see it because he was too busy looking at himself in the mirror. Daniel lost $240 million because he forgot one simple truth. You can't build an empire on someone's back and then act surprised when they stand up. I stood up, and when I did, his whole world came crashing down. So here's what I want you to take from my story. Know your worth. Not what someone tells you you're worth. Not what society says you're worth. What you actually bring to the table. Document it. Protect it. Never apologize for it. Get your name on the papers. If you're building something with someone, make sure the law recognizes your contribution. Make sure you can't be erased or written out of history. Keep records. Of everything. Every contribution you make. Every dollar you invest. Every success you create. Because one day you might need to prove what you've done. Trust but verify. Love doesn't mean blindness. Partnership doesn't mean giving up all control. You can believe in someone and still protect yourself. Never let anyone make you feel small. Especially not someone who's standing on the ladder you're holding for them. And finally, remember this. The person who underestimates you today might be answering to you tomorrow. I'm living proof of that. Daniel thought he won. He thought he had all the power. He thought I'd fall apart and accept whatever scraps he threw my way. Instead, I took everything he thought was his and walked away with my head held high. That's not revenge. That's justice. That's what happens when you try to erase someone who built the very ground you're standing on. My name is not important for this story. But my message is, you are not replaceable. You are not nothing. You are not whatever someone else decides you are. You are what you build, what you create, what you contribute, what you refuse to accept. And no one, not your husband, not your partner, not your boss, not anyone, can take that away from you unless you let them. I didn't let Daniel take it away from me. And you shouldn't let anyone take it away from you either. Remember that. Fight for that. Protect that. Because your worth isn't up for negotiation. It never was.